Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the next part of my Solomon's campaign in Fire in the Sky, the Great Pacific War. So we're now at the outset of the last turn of 1942, the October through to December turn, and it's back to the Japanese side in the sequence of play. Now, to say that Imperial HQ and 17th Army HQ and also the Imperial Navy's HQs are not very happy would probably be fairly accurate. So the Japanese offensive of the previous turn became rather unstuck. It was decisively beaten off by the United States. The casualties definitely favoured the US, and even more gallingly, in the latter half of the turn, the Allies managed to chuck in a series of air raids which slightly scraped off some of the air strength that the Japanese had been carefully building up. So now, with definitely no illusions about what they might be facing in the theatre, the Japanese are grimly determined to make good on this and turn this situation around. And they have the growing sense that they need to do this quickly because they have very little coming in by way of solid reinforcements. Whereas the indications are that the Allies are not only stiffening in the South Pacific, but they're stiffening in greater numbers than before. So this isn't going to be the easy victories of the beginning of the year. This is a very different war now. So what are the Japanese going to do about it? Well, to begin with, as it's the start of the turn and the transport phase, they are definitely going to buy more oil because they're going to need it. So they have 6 transport points left over from the previous turn. They're going to spend all of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they've got themselves back up to 12 oil points for naval operations this turn. They are not going to bother putting any of their precious destroyers into convoy escort because if the last battle was anything to go by, the United States isn't exactly committing any of its submarines to commerce warfare. So in the context of this short campaign, there's really no point to doing that. So the next question, first deployment. Now on to Japanese strategy. The US has moved more troops into the area. We have the 2nd Marine Division, which is known to have arrived at Espiritu Santo, but thankfully wasn't landed at Guadalcanal. Now, partly that may be a worrying statement of American confidence that the 1st Marine Division can hold its own. But it is of concern to the Japanese because if that lot are not going there, what else do the US have in mind? It's something they're going to have to worry about. The other question is, what are they going to play for? They have substantially increased their infantry strength at these bases. And it is now possible, despite Allied air superiority, to feasibly launch an attack on Port Moresby over the Owen Stanley Mountains. The giant black cat who appeared in a previous video seemed to think that this was a good idea. And it is one that's worth considering because if the Japanese can throw the Allies out of Port Moresby, they can then play for a draw if obviously they can't secure an outright victory. So maybe that's worth doing. As it's the deployment phase, it does make sense to consider this because a 1-hex deployment could have this huge mass of Japanese infantry moving there, down south that is. The alternative is to keep them in reserve either for a later attack on Port Moresby and to keep Allied forces here pinned, against the worry that the Japanese might do it. Or even use them in a 2-pronged landing on Guadalcanal. The options are all there, although they have to note their transport points. Now that's just reminded me I have to reset the Japanese transport points. They have 26 merchant points left, which is quite healthy, all things considered. And they also have 2 submarine points in theatre, so they do have options. I think if I were the Japanese, I would actually hold fire on those for now, so we won't do a 1 hex deployment. I think the time is not yet ripe. This could be a mistake on the Japanese part, I admit, but the main effort probably should come against Guadalcanal, and they don't want to use up too much by way of resources. So, difficult decision. Or, third option, maybe they should just keep Guadalcanal at arm's length and concentrate their efforts against Port Moresby. That's another choice, but Allied air power in the area does make things a little tricky. So, an attack has to go in somewhere, but where? I'll have a think about it while I'm shuffling other units around. So while the forces in theatre are trying to make their minds up, looking further to the north, I think the time has come to bring Kawaguchi southwards. So the Japanese will expend a transport point. And bring him down from Palau to Lae. So yes, the build-up will be here. They'll keep the air assets up here in reserve for the moment, but do they want to beef up the naval presence? Yes, they will bring the 2 destroyers from Truk down to Rabaul, so just those 2 for the moment. And that is another 2 transport points. Oh, if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned reinforcements, the Japanese are not entitled to any reinforcements this turn, which is not great for them. Okay. So we've stripped the naval units from... yes, that was Truk, wasn't it? Yes, we've stripped the naval units from Truk. Do we want to slightly weaken the air garrison in the Gilberts? I think no. Again, we'll keep them there to keep the Allies guessing, and also to give them something to faintly worry about. And as for the resources we have up in Japan, that is a substantial naval force. And the Japanese are going to send some of it down to Truk. So, of course, the newly rebuilt, reconstituted carrier forces with Hyo, Junyo, and Ryujo and Hosho will go down, along with the Tone-class heavy cruisers and some Fubukis. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 transport points in total. And they're looking at a fairly long journey. So to get them down to Truk, it's 1, 2, 3. They can't quite make it to a 4th. Ah, how annoying for the Japanese. It's a 2-step journey down to Truk, so they're going to have to pay for that. So that costs the Empire 8 precious transport points. They have 16 left. Now, bearing in mind they've got to budget for any operational troop movements when it comes to it. What about the battleship forces? The Japanese now have Yamato and Musashi at their disposal, and it's very, very tempting to send a huge battleship force down. But they have to be mindful of the supply state. So all the available battleships with some destroyers is 8 transport points, which is a lot. But if they're serious about wanting a build-up, they're going to have to do it one way or another. Let's see. Maybe they can do a partial trip. Yes, that might be the answer. All right. A very powerful force comprising Yamato and Musashi, all 4 Congos. Maybe not heavy cruisers. Let's instead use some destroyers, because we do want them to have some anti-submarine protection. And it does reduce the cost marginally to 7.5. So they will set out from the home islands to Manila and stop off there. And that does mean the Japanese have spent slightly less out of their transport pool. They're going to stop there because that was a very heavy expenditure in first deployment transport. So now comes the operational movement, and we come back to the vexed question of what they're going to do. I think in the interests of saving on transport points... Oh wait, no, we haven't quite finished our first deployment. No, we are going to... The southern half of New Guinea is hanging there really, really temptingly. And I'm going to have a quick think about this, because so much hangs on the decision in this turn, I feel. I mean, essentially, as I've already said, it boils down to 3 possibilities. The Japanese could go all out to secure New Guinea and try to force a draw. They could go all out for Guadalcanal and try to win the game. Or they could... They could try to divide their attention between both. Now that is extremely risky. If they do that and they fail, it's a very questionable whether they would recover over the remaining 2 turns of this game. So it is well worth thinking about, but not for too long, because I'm conscious you're all sort of waiting there for me to stop dithering and make a decision. Yes. I mean, it's really, really tempting to take advantage of the 1 hex deployment, because I would like to move all those forces down there, but I don't want it to go wrong either. Ah. Okay. You've all been very patient while I've been scratching my head over this situation. The Japanese will hold off on Guadalcanal this turn because they are not that confident that they have the necessary naval strength to force a major engagement. And they're also conscious that the US has kept its strength in the area. So what they're going to do is they're going to 1 hex deploy the units that started up there and send them down over the rugged Owen Stanley Mountains towards the Australians, who are grimly waiting in their positions around Port Moresby, or perhaps even fairly far up the Kokoda Trail. They're not exactly going to cede them all that ground without a fight. Now, it's going to be interesting because the Japanese have no direct air support beyond long range, but they do outnumber the defenders by 6-1 on the ground. So we'll have to see what happens there. There's going to be no naval movement, which is very clever on the Japanese part because it deprives the Allies of the ability to react, which I think is probably a sensible move if they want to keep this turn's conflict manageable. So they've done their operational movement. That's all they're going to do, a big landward attack on New Guinea. And now the air commitment phase. It was perhaps a mistake not reinforcing the air units there, because what's happened now is that they don't have sufficient force to really press a decent attack there. But that was my error, so I'm going to live with it. I probably should have poured more aircraft in, but I was being a bit cautious. Let's see how it plays out. And so we go straight to the combat phase then. So let me get my battle board. So the Japanese have long-range air coming in from Rabaul, and they have infantry units marching overland. The Australians have the 30th Australian Brigade, and quite a lot of aircraft at the base. So calculating air strength points, the Japanese really don't turn up with much. They've only got one. And the Australians have 4. That's looking quite healthy. The Japanese are probably regretting not throwing in fleet support, but then again, the ongoing spectre of American intervention before they feel ready for a big showdown it has stayed their hand, and I think it was a sensibly cautious move to make. So let's see how this goes. Air superiority, 1 Japanese dice versus 4 Allied. And unfortunately, the Allies win, so they have just given themselves air supremacy over the theatre. So there were no losses to the Allied side, and they beat off the Japanese air attack. That's unfortunate for the Japanese. And now we go straight to ground combat. So the Japanese have 6 land combat points. Oh yes, all the remaining Allied air is going to go into ground support, unsurprisingly. Oh wait, except it won't, because they're... yes, it will. It will. Nothing else for it to do, really. So the Japanese roll their 6 dice. And they do score 3 hits. So I'm just going to use one of their dice to remind myself that 3 hits were scored on the Australian ground unit. The Australians return fire with air support. And they only score 1 hit. That's not brilliant. So let me just mark that. Sorry about the pause there. I just had a complete brain fail about how land unit damage is applied on the ground. So I'm just going to quickly flip through the rule book to remind myself. Okay. So the Japanese scored 3 hits, which is equal. It's greater than the number of hits the Australians scored, but it is not greater than the combined total of the Australian strength points and the number of hits they scored. So, as it is not greater, the Australians thankfully are not eliminated, but they are flipped. So that is not good. So everyone returns to their positions. And the rather scary knife-edged situation at the end of all of that is that the Australians and the Allies generally, because it's mixed Commonwealth US Air Forces, have definitely got the upper hand in the air, but the Japanese are winning on the ground. And all they need do on a future turn, if the Allies don't reinforce, is to press that advantage, and Port Moresby may well fall. This does show up demonstrate the wisdom of the Allies in having the 2nd Marine Division on standby, because Guadalcanal was still a pretty safe bet, whereas Port Moresby had its vulnerabilities. So we're going to have to see what happens there. But that is, of course, the end of the Japanese combat phase, so everyone goes back to base. The Japanese are flush with victory. They can see Port Moresby. They're at the outer perimeter, but there's still some annoying Australians who are not letting them pass. So, as I say, it's on a bit of a knife edge there. So everyone's returned to base. Now, what about second deployment? There's quite a few units that did not move the first time round. And I wonder if it's worth summoning them over. In light of what that battle revealed of Japanese aerial deficiencies, I am going to slightly denude the Gilbert Islands air garrison and beef up the Rabaul one just to bring them up to full strength again. So I'll pay the cost for doing that. Didn't cost the Japanese too much in terms of their merchant expenditure. They have 8 points left of transport ships, and they have a respectable amount of fuel because there was no naval operational movement this turn. So perhaps it is worth taking these fellows down on the next leg of their journey. Or maybe leave them there for now and bring another force down to Truk. We have the carrier forces there. Are we going to need more cruisers and destroyers? The answer is probably. But then the other issue the Japanese face, and this is where it gets complicated for them, is can they afford to overload their harbour capacity? I mean, obviously Truk can have any number of ships, but it will still be a bit awkward. And also it does place them within range of any naughtiness the Allies might want to try. So maybe the Japanese will leave it for that turn. They have 8 transport points left, which does mean a lot of oil on a future turn. and they could actually throw in a big offensive. They don't know what the Allies are going to do to try and relieve Port Moresby, but it probably will be something significant. So they'll have to see what happens there. Obviously, the longer that drags on, the more chances the Allies will have of bringing substantial reinforcements in. But even if it does no more than serve as a diversion and stop useful things from pouring into Guadalcanal, then it will have served a purpose of sorts. So I'm going to end the Japanese turn there. And we will see what happens when the Allies react. I must admit, from the Allied perspective, given their weaknesses in the air, I was not expecting the Japanese to be quite so successful. And I've actually breathed a huge sigh of relief with my Allied hat on that Port Moresby didn't actually fall in that turn, because that would have added a very awkward dimension to the game from the Allied perspective. Because at the moment, they're just sitting comfortably waiting for the Japanese to lose. But the Japanese have demonstrated that they've still got a lot of fight left in the theatre, and something's going to have to be done about that. So let us see what the Allies do. So that's the end of the Japanese half of the turn, so I will stop this one there. As always, thank you guys very much for following the series. I hope you're continuing to find this campaign interesting and enjoyable. I'm certainly still having loads of fun making it. To all my fellow veterans, thank you so much for your company, for following this series, for watching the videos, and for the comments. Thank you so much for the comments. I'm still ploughing my way through those. I'm somewhat behind, but I'll get back to you guys as soon as I can. And do keep the observations coming if you so wish. It's always great to have that interaction. To anyone who's new to my channel, if this is the first video you've watched, a warm welcome to you. I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope it made sense. If it's fire in the sky that you're interested in, then welcome. There are loads more, well, a few videos, I should say, on this channel relating to this brilliant game. If it's wargaming more generally that you're interested in, then please have a wander around. I hope you spot something else on the channel that catches your fancy as well. So yes, as always, whoever you are and wherever you're watching from, thank you so much again for staying with me on this one. And I really look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.